excited to learn more from Jan Weinberg. He's the founder of Show Up America and one of our partners in peace at CODEPINK and with the whole Coalition for Peace. Jan is endlessly diving into, researching, figuring it out, finding his way into rooms, getting to talk to people, getting into a BlackRock shareholder meeting and being able to deliver the message. He's tireless, fearless, and deeply informed. And so I'm looking forward to get more of that information from him today. But Show Up America is his organization, and it's designed to promote civic engagement. And really at the core of this is, what do we know and how can we disrupt the lies that are given to us? So he focuses his organizing on research and writing and his speaking engagements. And I'm just thrilled to be in the streets and engage for peace with him. Today, right away when we started China's Not Our Enemy, Jan was there and he had answers. And he's been with us since we started, so it's exciting now to hear what he's found in his research, a research that he calls "Good treaties make for good neighbors." And so let's start. Jan, welcome to today with China is Not Our Enemy. Let's start with, you said something very provocative to me. You said, by what authority does Congress have to go into treaties and get out of treaties? And if we don't trust treaties, how can we even be in diplomacy or working our way to peace? So by what authority?
It's great to be with you, Jodie, and to be part of China's Not Our Enemy. I was shocked to find out that a president can withdraw from international treaties without going back to the Senate for their advice and consent. It is required by the Constitution that the Senate advises and consents on all international treaties. This occurred when Trump announced that he was withdrawing from the INF Treaty. That's the treaty that initiated between America and the Soviet Socialist Republic on the elimination of intermediate range and short range missiles. Well, I was questioning, how could the president do that without Congress? So what we have is a situation that a flaw there is in the Constitution. It's vacant from the Constitution.
Wait, so there's nothing in the Constitution that says, how do you get out of a treaty?
That's correct.
Whoa.
And for about 40 years now, there's been prominent senators who now and then write about it, that there's the flaw, that it needs to be corrected. There's prestigious law school professors that have written about it, but action has not been taken. There is a bill in a committee in the House of Representatives on this issue, which we'll get into later, which I'm very encouraged about, that somebody is beginning to discuss it. But I asked the question, by what authority? And I have a solution to this, and several others as well. And the reason being is, if one person can withdraw from an international treaty, how are we to be trusted? What if that person happens to be the president of the United States and is a madman? That could possibly happen. So China, North Korea, Iran, for example, would have no trust in our treaties if they could be wiped out. And if we also look at the history of the United States and treaties, we could ask the First Nations people, would you trust another treaty with the United States? Knowing that if we put it together, one person could wipe it out. Thomas Jefferson started writing about it, about corrective measures for the House of Representatives and the Senate to deal with this right after, realizing that it was vacant from the Constitution. Now, I don't expect anybody to believe me. That's why I put the expose together, by what authority, which is in all of their words. So if I may, I'd like to propose the solution and then go in deeper about the erosion of trust and how Congress is involved with the military industrial congressional Congress. I don't want Congress to be left out, because Congress is complicit. It's a very simple solution that in any treaty that is put together, it's advised and consented by the Senate only, not the House of Representatives, that the following passage is included. An act of the Senate passed by 2/3 majority is required to cause the abrogation of this treaty. That in there in itself would stop a president from doing it on their own.
Wow, and why haven't they done that before?
I believe that our Congress over the last 40 years or so stepped away from just about all of the foreign affairs authority that is embedded in the Constitution. War powers, the regulation of commerce is in the hands solely, according to the Constitution, of Congress. But because they passed laws since the 1920s, a president could issue tariffs, embargoes, sanctions, without having to turn back to Congress every time. And these are what have now turned into what we have labeled coercive economic measures. What I have labeled is the economic battlefield. I don't think they want to do the work, but I believe that introducing this into the peace movement, into academia, into the mainstream media, and I am reaching out next week to every single chief of staff in the Senate, House, and their foreign affairs advisors and their legislative directors on this initiative.
Well,
Go
so
ahead.
really what you're talking about is what we struggle with daily, which is that there are so many wars going on and there's sanctions. So really, not only is it trade, but it's been able to put the power to abuse another country in the hands of one person, which was never the intention in the Constitution, because that's a crazy notion just in itself.
Yes. So there is in my expose, abdicated Congress and Foreign Affairs Authority. It is very long and very detailed on the history of Congress walking away knowingly from their constitutional authority.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I'm focusing on correcting the withdrawal from international treaties is I believe that 100 senators will agree with this. They do the work to put a treaty together. I don't believe that they want one person to wipe out their work.
Mm-hmm.
And it will also elevate the conversation on separation of powers issues. War powers, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, why is this important to China? Like, so we're talking about China's not the enemy. Why is this something we really need to know about China?
I'll answer that philosophically, and then I'd like to get into a few of my prepared remarks, which have to do with legislative measures that led up to this point.
Okay.
If we put together a treaty with China, and I believe it should be done before wars break out, I believe that we should have a peace and prosperity treaty with China that a one person cannot walk away from. I believe that we should do treaties before war instead of waiting. And it's meaningful, but if there is a treaty with North Korea, for example, it affects China as well. And for one person to be able to walk away from that treaty would be harmful. So if I may go into a few things, if you don't mind. The separation of powers between the presidency and Congress, ascribed from our Constitution, has eroded to the point that trust between the United States and respective allies and adversaries is most precarious. The coercive measures, sanctions, tariffs, and embargoes on the economic battlefield and run rampant undeclared wars have become commonplace in the hands of the presidency, to the point that the presidency over time has been perceived as an imperial presidency. The United States of America perceived and reacted to as imperial America. That is how China views our foreign affairs initiatives. When we say that we want to export our values. And this has been going on for many, many years. The Department of State from early on in the Obama administration say Obama's pivot to Asia is purposes to export our values. Well, we have about 2 billion people in the Asia Pacific who say, we don't necessarily want your values considering your nation's history. And it is a matter of being considerate to our adversaries to understand their point of view. They understand American history better than Americans do. And we are not to be trusted. So by having the conversation on how to have solid treaties or other international agreements that cannot be wiped out by one person, well, that shows there's no democracy if one person could eliminate a treaty. What I'd like to do is discuss a few things. What led to my research. Ex-Senator Feingold wrote an article on the abdication of treaties when Trump announced that he was withdrawing from it. So you can see this is not just my words. And I corresponded with Russ Feingold to get guidance on my document that I was putting together. He introduced me to Professor Harold Koh in the Yale Law School, who also advised about my document on measures that Congress need to take. They are both wishing me well with this initiative, which was fantastic. Russ Feingold said in his NBC News document, no treaty can be ratified without a 2/3 vote of the Senate. And once ratified, a treaty becomes part of the Supreme Court of the land, which logically means that it can only be undone by Congress and the president, or at least by a vote of the Senate. But that's not what they are doing. And this goes back to Barry Goldwater 40 years ago, writing about this, saying that we need to correct this.
But when the answer is so simple, what do you think is in the way of that being the last sentence?
This is the naive person in me. That we haven't thought of it.
Really?
That we haven't had a concerted effort to try to get this done. I don't believe we focused on this as peace activists, as in academia, the think tanks, the professors who are in the law schools. I don't think we've all come together to focus on it. And I think this is going to be an easy one to get done. I'm confident about it. And I like to think it's just that we didn't try. Imagine that if we are successful getting this changed. And by the way, I have supported about 20 different organizations behind this already. They just want to see how I do today, how I come across, if I'm logical, intelligent, articulate. How am I doing so far?
I mean, I also want to understand, so you're talking about something that affects all of our lives. It affects the globe, it affects the planet. But we're not reading about it in the media. Like, what was your research like? What did you have to do to figure this all out?
Well, I go to the original sources. I go into the State Department archives, Department of Defense archives, other White House briefs on this. I was introduced to Professor Koh from Russ Feingold, and he has a major document on the options, including language that could be deliberated and voted on by Congress. There's a wide discussion now if the House of Representatives should be involved or not in walking away from a treaty. There's a debate with law professors on this. There's not a debate in Congress at this point. There's not a debate or even discussion. So I am now introducing this. And the expose that I wrote, I think, is going to be helpful. But if I may, I want to go to 3 measures where trust was eroded between the United States and Congress, which were provocative measures by the United States. And until we have that discussion about what our country had done, and for some senators to take it on, but right now they're all silent on 3 things, and I'm going to go over those quickly. The militarization aspects of Obama's pivot to Asia. Now, mind you, most people do not know that the Trans-Pacific Partnership was folded into Obama's pivot to Asia. The TPP was not a standalone initiative when he got in office. It became an economic program, it became a military program. The aspects of Obama's pivot to Asia included forward deployment of our military assets, enhanced military-to-military exercises, expansion of military bases, and the sale and gifting of weapon systems throughout the Indo-Asia Pacific. This was not strategic patience, which they describe it. That is a misconception. By labeling—
That's hostile.
Say that again, please.
It's hostile. And
it is
beyond hostile because, you know, I can remember when we were in Iraq and it was the night after Powell had addressed the UN and he'd said, you know, there's weapons of mass destruction and everybody knew there weren't. And there we were in Iraq with like 350 people in the information center. And that night we went up on the roof where everybody reported back and all the people were reporting to Europe that like, oh, well, there's obviously not going to be a war on Iraq because that was really stupid and dumb. And of course, nobody believed it. But then there was this one reporter from CNN that got up on his block and said, we must go to war now. And it was just like, you were in the same room, but he's getting paid to say we go to war. And then next morning, I went to bed thinking there's no way they can go to war in Iraq. That was just stupid beyond belief. And I woke up to everyone inside the hotel crying and going, how do I protect my children? And that I watched terrorism befall a country before the bombs. That as soon as you bring war into the next to, as soon as it becomes close, it's a level of anxiety that no one should have to deal with. And that after we know what 9/11 felt like, everyone, and especially if that you would do that to another country is just abominable. I mean, like, that's not how we treat each other. So here we are talking about treaties, which are so important to peace, because instead of like, you know, as we say, instead of it not understanding how to be in conflict and calling it abuse, we need to accept conflict and come to a table so that we can create treaties so that we can have diplomacy in ways that we can trust each other. And obviously that's just been eroded on steroids by the United States for its history. But what you're describing about Obama and the moving the militarism to the oceans surrounding China and arming more, you know, unwilling coalition partners, that's violence. That's a form of terrorism.
It is. It's to create trepidation. A few other points about Obama's pivot to Asia before I move on to some recent acts of Congress. And you do raise an important point. Part of why I'm doing this is because I believe that we're headed to a war with China if the US military continues what they're doing. All we have to do is look at the daily messages from Indo-PACOM. That's the United States military. And I read it daily. In fact, I post my own comments in there boldly every day. But the purpose of Obama's pivot to Asia was to contain China economically and militarily. And China reacted to it. There's a quick sidebar, if I may, which you can get into greater depth at another time, but it is asserted that China reacted to being excluded from the Trans-Pacific Partnership by instituting their own extensive international economic, trade, and infrastructure development programs, the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. If it's true that they reacted to that by being excluded, it was a fatal flaw in our negotiations, which is one of our biggest trading partners. In 2018, Congress unanimously passed the Asia Reassurance Initiative Act, also known as ARIA, which was initiated by Senators Gardner, Markey, and Rubio. It passed without a single rebuke by anyone in Congress. And China reacted to this because it enhanced our oil exploration in the South China Sea. It enhanced weapon sales to Taiwan. It enhanced sanctions against North Korea. This was not a benign act, but there was no discussion about this. In fact, there was one interview in depth about every single clause, and that was done by me, and I'm just a peace activist. And as I tried to say,
just a peace activist. Yeah. That's an important thing.
This is a quote from Senator Markey at the time. And for us to understand, try to perceive this from China's point of view. With this funding, Congress amplifies the message that Senator Gardner and I have been sending since we developed ARIA. The United States is invested in Asia's success. Our government is now further empowered to advance America's interest as we witness the spread of authoritarian governance, human rights violations, and aggressive Chinese military modernization in the region. The United States cannot afford to see leadership as the country that has best empowers people across Indo-Asia Pacific to seek freedom and economic opportunity. This was glaring, and this was missed by everyone. If we aren't adversaries with a nation, please try not to insult them, especially when our behavior is really no different. I'm going to dig in a little deeper. I was reminded of a statement that Secretary of State Hillary Clinton made during a private Goldman Sachs speech, June 4th, 2013, which we know about thanks to WikiLeaks. Shout out to Julian Assange.
Thank you.
You know that we all hold the Chinese if they continue to develop this missile program, referring to North Korea, that they get an ICBM and that they had the capacity to carry a small nuclear weapon on it, which is what they're aiming to do. We cannot abide by that because they could not only do damage to our treaty allies, namely Japan and South Korea, but they could actually reach Hawaii and the West Coast theoretically. And we're going to ring China with missile defense. We're going to put more of our fleet in the area. So China, come on, you either control them or we're going to have to defend against them. This is significant. This is the Secretary of State who was the main proponent for the pivot to Asia, threatening North Korea and China. This is coercion. And again, thank you, Julian Assange, for your magnificent work. Similarly, during preparations for a CBS News interview, Hillary Clinton, upon being informed that Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi had been killed, she replied while laughing, "We came, we saw, he died." This is on the air. Picture this from Kim Jong-un's perspective and from China's perspective. With regime change, nobody called anyone out on this. This is the Secretary of State saying these type of things. There's a deep erosion of trust. But I came up with a meme, a saying that I tried to encapsulate all of this. So I'm working on this and I don't mind anyone helping me edit this. Antagonism, which is completely antithetical to the establishment and maintenance of trust, is the United States system of foreign affairs political ideology. It appears as at every turn where it tried to antagonize other nations, allies, and adversaries alike. And that absolutely has to change. So one last bit of legislation from Congress. most recently on June 23rd, 2020, that's just a short while ago, Congress passed the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2021. What is not known was the Pacific Deterrence Initiative that was established by Senator Jim Inhofe, who's the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, was embedded in the act. And there was not any admonishment from anyone in Congress on this. And I am going to read this from the NDAA. Section 1251, for anyone who wants to look it up, Pacific Deterrence Initiative. The purpose of this initiative is to increase lethality of the joint forces in the Indo-Pacific region. It says it in the NDAA, and we have not heard anyone on the campaign trail, any of our progressive members of Congress, call that out. They use the word lethality. It's pretty incredible. How would you react as a nation? And would you trust our treaties? We say we want to have a treaty with you now, knowing that one person could withdraw from it.
Yeah, but I mean, what the only way you can respond, unfortunately, and really, really unfortunately, because I don't think China is an imperialist, nation. Unfortunately, you drive the other country to become militarized. It's literally like, while we as peace activists are trying to demilitarize the globe, the United States government is militarizing the globe, and not just militarizing the globe, but like if China is like, I think they spend 1/4, it's a country of 1.5 billion people, but they spend 1/4 of what we and our allies spend on military each year. And so, that's a small amount of money. What if they decide, okay, we have to take our money that we use to pull people out of poverty and to take care of the planet, and we put that in the military. So, the US has been forcing this for like a century, if we think of all those wars we drive, we have to also think of the costs they are to all the people that we do the same coercion to. And so here we are now in this moment. We've seen it before, we've seen it through history. We saw it together around Iraq. You just mentioned Libya, where it's just like, you get to take out somebody and not pay any consequences while destabilizing the entire Middle East and militarizing a whole bunch of people you don't even know who they are. They get to go then do little wars on little countries and destabilize Mali and on and create more havoc in Iraq. But yes, that's horrible. But Jan, aren't we talking about nuclear war here?
It could likely happen. Even if there's conventional warfare and the Strait of Malacca is jammed up, which is 40% of the commerce that goes through the Asia Pacific over to India, Africa, the Middle East, that puts billions of people out of work if there's no commerce. And that could easily happen. China is very, very concerned about the Malacca Strait Patrol and the United States' involvement with India and their development of the Nicobar Islands outside of the Malacca Strait. If I may, and do we have a few more minutes, or we're just about done?
Yeah, no, tell me, please.
I was going to want to portray what Donald Trump inherited, because when people say that we don't want to have a Cold War with China, I want to portray that we're already there and we're already on a war footing with a nation that, if we have a peace and prosperity treaty and we stand down our military and cooperate for humanitarian aid, instead, there's prosperity for everyone on this planet. This is the key. And the lock that I want to put it into is correcting international treaties. But I'm going to read something here that is glaring, and I'll try to do this, and I know we're going to go over for a few minutes. Despite unequivocal admonishments from the governments of China and North Korea, the United States elaborated strategic cooperation agreements with Australia, Cambodia, India, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, New Zealand, the Philippines, Singapore, Taiwan, Thailand, and Vietnam, which included the deployment of the THAAD missile systems to South Korea, 1.3 billion in armament sales to Taiwan, supported Japan Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's push to reinterpret Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, which previously prohibited offensive military engagement, in disregard of the extensive protests in Japan, the lifting of the US arms embargo against Vietnam, the expansion of US military base use in the Philippines, all pre-planned militarization aspects of the Obama administration's pivot to Asia, which from the point of view of the defense contractors served their business interests very well.
That's so horrible.
Yes, we've been on this war footing for a long time, and it's been extremely profitable. On another conversation, we will be able to talk about the influences of the armament industry on members of Congress and the general public.
Cool. I look forward to that, Jan. I want to say we have one of our listeners is just baffled like me. How do we not know this? I mean, it's, you know, where are the checks and balances? We've heard, since we were kids in school, the great democracy has checks and balances. So yet we're seeing another of the tears in what should be democracy, but isn't, and what could lead to peace, but can't. If we can't have treaties, and if we can't be trusted, then we're really bullies, and that's not good.
How do we not know that?
Yeah.
Are we referring to the treaty initiatives, or the Asia Reassurance Initiative Act, or the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, or the militarization aspects of Obama's pivot to Asia? How is it that we don't know any of these things?
Any of it.
Okay. Part of it is understanding the advertisements in mainstream media. And just a quick one, the Hill, Roll Call, and Politico, which are delivered every day to every congressional office, they run full-page ads regularly from the arms manufacturers, which is only an advertisement to show them the passage through the revolving door. It's not really about the products. So basically, is promises to members of Congress and their staff about their careers. Cool. There's undue influences throughout our society in higher education, etc. Many of us know the military industrial congressional media complex.
All right, well, so that's for our next chapter. Stay tuned. We're going to bring Jan back because he's got a lot that he knows and a lot to share. But this was a deep dive into how can we get to peace if we can't have treaties. So thanks, Jan, for all your research and for sharing it with us and all you do for peace every day. And so the rest of you, China is not our enemy. Share what you've learned, and we've got to stop this Cold War and do what Jan said, have a connection and cooperation, because we have big problems to solve and we don't want to be creating anymore. Peace.